Welcome to the Fhtf Rhtr podcast. I am your host, Chris Ande, and today we intend to talk about a topic that has so many limbs and so many pockets that I hope that we can do it, even if it's just a little bit of justice. First of all, I hope you like the channel. I hope you subscribe, and I hope that you share it to at least one person. That's what we ask. Just share to one person, or share to one WhatsApp group. Thank you very much for being here with us. Today, we want to talk about the billionaire kidnapper known as Eva. When this story broke out, it was one of those stories that catches the attention of people because of how outlandish and how unbelievable it sounds. But this is Nigeria, and in Nigeria, the unbelievable happens every day. Let's kick off this episode. Nigerians are not strangers to the phenomenon of the money ritual. Nigerians cannot really explain to you how it works. We don't know where the money comes from in a money ritual. We don't know what the sacrifice does. And we don't even know if it is a sacrifice that is used during a money ritual. We don't really know this. But as a people, largely, we agree and we believe that the exchange of life for money is real. And that is enough. It is. That is enough. In 2017, the story broke about the billionaire kidnapper. Basically, it was said that in some of his operations, he made as much as $1 million. Now, for many of us who are listening now, we may not know what $1 million would have sounded like back then. It's not really about the zero, it's about the value. Back then, commodities that we buy today were quadruple their prices. Eggs still sold back then for 20 and 30 naira. Pure water back then was still 5 naira. So you need to understand that when somebody was dealing with $1 million before the pandemic, that was a lot of money, not just in Nigeria, anywhere. The Inspector General of Police at the time mentioned that Evans was a very smart man because he had been on the wanted list of the Lagos state government, the Edo state government, and the Anambra state government for 4 years. And in those 4 years, he had consistently and strategically evaded capture by security forces. Eventually, he was caught. He was caught in a sting operation where he tried to extort money from somebody, and he was taken to the Lagos High Court, sitting at Tafawa Balewa Square, and the court ordered that the billionaire kidnapper Evans, eventually he was caught. But before he was caught, he had a long go of it. In one of his cases, he was arraigned before the Lagos High Court at Tafawa Balewa Square, and the court had to order that billionaire Evans was to refund the sum of 233,000 euros, which was the ransom that he had obtained from one of his victims named Chief Donatus Dono. The judge was Justice Olukayode Ogunjobi, and he ordered that on top of the 233,000 euros, that Billionaire Evans should pay 50 million naira in general damages in favor of Chief Duru, who was a pharmacist. It turns out that Evans, the kidnapper, had kidnapped Chief Duru on the 14th of February 2017 and asked for a ransom, and before he paid, he had held him hostage. But who was Evans? Who was he? First of all, this is a good point to tell you that Billionaire Evans is obviously not his name. That was the name that was given to him by the police officers who were after him. It was given to him because of how much he had, how much he charged, and how much he was flaunting at the time. His real name, and please forgive me because I'm about to butcher this a bit, his real name was Chukwudumene Onwoamadike, and he is a native of Nnewi in Anambra State. There was no real information given about his family, and rightly so. Even if I could find that information, I would not say it here because this is really not their business. This is his crime. He should face the music. There is no need to tarnish other people's names with his. He was arrested in Lagos on the weekend of 10th to 11th of June 2017. And when he was arraigned, 52 charges were brought against him. Basically, the book was thrown at him. Just for those of us who do not know, I need to explain what it means for the book to be thrown at you, because I know that many of us hear this term and we don't really understand what it means. So here's what people in law enforcement do. You can be charged with a crime, and then you can be charged with multiple crimes depending on how severe the court wants to treat you and how notorious you are in the eyes of the court. So for example, and this may be a bad analogy, but just humor me. You may break into somebody's house and take something. No, you break into somebody's house with a big rock, and then you take a computer and leave the house. And they can charge you with breaking and entering and then charge you with theft. Or they can throw the book at you. And when they throw the book at you, they can charge you with possession of a dangerous weapon, breaking and entering with intention to cause bodily harm. I don't know if you understand the picture. Basically, in almost every crime, there are elements there to establish 3 or 4 other crimes. So when you hear that somebody was charged with 52 counts, then with 52 charges, you must understand that they are trying to make sure that this person does not get away. His major charge was for the unlawful capture of a person called Uche Okerafo in the Fhtf area of Lagos State on the 21st of November 2017, and when he demanded a ransom of $2 million. Another aside, here's something interesting. For those people who are conversant with Lagos, who understand how Lagos is, there are certain parts of Lagos that are only familiar to people who live around those parts. Lagos is a small place, but at the same time it's a big place. It's a small place because geographically it's small, but it's a big place because every part of Lagos is important and something is happening in every part of Lagos. Festa, or the axis where you find Festa, or really Festa or Jaw, is not, and please don't be upset with me for people who live around there, is not the safest place in Lagos. As a matter of fact, many people will tell you that that is really not the place to be when darkness falls. It is notoriously known for danger. So, I say all this to say, when activities like these happen, they have a way of drawing themselves to some of those corners of the state. Evans himself was wanted for multiple murders, was wanted for armed robberies, for kidnappings, for unlawful possession of firearms, for unlawful possession of ammunition, and for conspiracy. Now, here's a timeline of some of the things that he did. On Friday, February 25th, 2022, the Lagos State High Court found him guilty of kidnapping and conspiracy. In the ruling, the trial judge said, and I quote, "He showed no remorse in the dock and tried to lie his way out of the crimes despite the video evidence." Now, for those who follow the proceedings, this is one of those cases where it was quite clear that the police was not bluffing when they said that they had been on his tail for more than 4 years. Truly, they knew who he was, they knew what he was doing, and they were determined to get him. Whether they got him on time or not is another matter, because he seemed to have successfully done a lot of damage by the time that he was caught. It will interest you to know that Billionaire Evans, as he was fondly called, I don't know if it's right to say he was fondly called that, but that's the most appropriate term in this case because that's not his name as we've established. But Billionaire Evans actually has a book that was written about him, and you can find this book on the popular bookseller Amazon. It was written by Frank Okiria, and it is titled Chukwudumemi Onwa Amadike. For my Easterners, please forgive me if I butchered that name and help us with the proper pronunciation in the comments. Alias Evans, the billionaire kidnapper. And I would assume that a book like this is just as fascinated by the fact that somebody could just come out of nowhere with this kind of profile, with this kind of occupation, and with this kind of publicity, and shoot straight into the Nigerian mainstream. It is a very curious case, but like I always say, it is not, and this is very important, it is not a singularly peculiar case in Nigeria. We've had people like him before, and as much as it pains me to say this, we've had and will have people like him after. When you see pictures of Evans the kidnapper, one of the first things that you would see, and I don't know if this was done because the news agencies were attempting to portray this particular picture, but he seemed visibly hardened. He looked like somebody who was ready for what was coming to him. And by this I mean He had this really stone cold eyes, reddened. He had a very standoffish posture, and despite his small stature, which he was quite not diminutive, but he wasn't a tall man, he seemed like somebody who you would not want to get too close to because you would be in his shadow. In other pictures, he seemed to be much more calculated, and then in other pictures, he seemed to be in the kind of position where you would think he just might break. Newsflash, he did not break. He did not break. Despite all the many and quite deadly, and this is not a rumor, they are very deadly techniques that are used by the Nigerian security operatives to get information out of people. He seemed to have held his peace. Then again, he may have spoken, and by the rules of the trade, we were not told the things that he said. That is a possibility. Is something that surprises me with cases like this is the as Nigerians we like a bit of furor. We like glamour. We like activity. You know, Nigerians are the kind of people who would hear that the fight is going on and they would come to see, despite the fact that that spells danger. They want to see what is happening. And for people like Billionaire Evans, that worked not in his favor per se, but he did have the spotlight for a while. And for example, we have a newspaper headline here from Vanguard where he was basically given the entire page talking about how he was brought to court, how the court was stopped for him, how other cases had to be stood down, um, how they explained some of the things that he did during the process of his nefarious activities, and even his sentencing. A lot of all of this happened to, for want of a better word, razzmatazz. And it's a curious thing when you look at Nigerians. We sometimes treat our criminals as though they are celebrities. This is something that happened with Clifford Oji. It happened with Reverend King. It's not a it's it's almost commonplace, if I should say. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. Um, for those of us who are thinking, obviously, when someone is sentenced to life imprisonment, there is a hanging shadow where you think that the president may come sometime later and grant a pardon or something like that. But I must say this, and for those of us who know, the finality of the legal system in Nigeria is not so clear cut now that we are no longer under authoritarian rule. While we had military governments, the firing squad, death by hanging was much more commonplace for things like this. But now that we are in our fourth republic, it is much more the case that when somebody is convicted for crimes such as this, as grave as this, it's life imprisonment. And there is the philosophical question, why is somebody who has thrown his life away, why will state resources now be put into feeding him and taking care of him? It now goes back to that question of rehabilitation versus punishment. So are they punishing him or are they trying to rehabilitate him? Because as far as many Nigerians go, and I should confess that I am one of those Nigerians. I do not see the point of rehabilitating an individual such as this. And his victims are his victims. So, what are the corrective measures that we want to take from this? I think it's a good question that we can look at in the comment section and see if we can answer. For a person like Billionaire Evans, what does the corrective system have to offer him, and what does he have to offer Nigeria as a rehabilitated person? Um, I should put a small personal story. When I was younger, I grew up in communal pockets. I grew up in barracks. I grew up in Mokola barracks in Ibadan, and then in Ann barracks in Lagos. And in both of those places, families knew families. I knew my friends' fathers and mothers. They knew my father and mother. So when I was walking on the road, for example, and I saw a man walking, I would know him, I would greet him. He would greet me and he would ask me, "How is your father? How is your mother?" There was still the sense of communal upbringing at the time. But when I started going to primary school and I attended Command Children's School, that was one of the first times that my parents had to caution me and say, when somebody gives you something, say no. If you see something on the ground, do not pick it. Because the idea of children being kidnapped had become commonplace. And this is back in the late 90s, the early 2000s. Children were being kidnapped. The Yoruba people will say "bomo bomo." I knew what "bomo bomo." I knew how to say "bomo bomo," and I could. It rang a bell in my head since I was about 5 years old. And this particular trend has been going on for years in Nigeria. Right now, the average young person is at alert. And when I say young person, I mean the average child is at alert if an adult offers him anything for no reason. He starts to wonder, where do you want to take me to? This is just an example of how things like this can eat into the fabric of the society and rob us of some of the things that we should be proud of, which is our communal sense of life. Again, on the three-headed snake, um, organ trafficking is not something that a lot of people have admitted to. In fact, they hide away from it a lot of the time. People act as though there's no such thing as organ trafficking. The truth of the matter is, organ trafficking is, one, it's big business, and two, it is a closed business. You don't just go into organ trafficking. It is too delicate. Think about it. If you're going to have organs, you need to have people who need the organs. You need to have people who can keep the organs and people who can get the organs to where you need those organs to be. It's not going to be done by somebody who just wakes up and says, "I know a couple of people who can harvest their organs." No, it's a very connected, networked, and deeply entrenched business that shows that organized crime actually has a home in our society. And it's painful to think like that, but it's true. It's painful to think that way, and it's true. And the moment you hear of kidnappings, like I say, it's one of these three things. It's one of these three things. It is organ harvesting, it is child trafficking. One one of the one of the things that we try to establish in this podcast is the fact that despite how novel or how new some of the things we discuss are to us and to you. These things have been going on for ages. Here we have a newspaper clipping from the Otukutu newspaper. I think this newspaper was discontinued in the 90s, and it talks about a ritual syndicate ravaging the quiet town of Owerri. Please don't come for me, but this is something that historically in Nigeria has this face. Eastern Nigeria has had its fair share of problems with um, kidnappings and ritual killings and harvesting of organs. And now in Nigeria today, it is so widespread. It has gone all around the country, and you tend to think, what if we stopped it at this point? What if we stopped? What if we discouraged it at this time? Would it have been better? Maybe, maybe. But think about the picture, that something that was a headline more than 30 years ago is still a headline today in Nigeria. A negative thing, albeit. I came across this particular image and I had to share it with you because it's one of those images that you see, and first of all, it communicates madness. Because when you see it, it's like, what is this nonsense? But at the same time, it is an image that tells you that people are looking into this thing because it is a serious matter. There are people whose realities are enveloped in issues like this. So, this image, for example, attempts to say ritual killings for what reason? And we are seeing the very many um, reasons for ritual killings. It says for spiritual fortification and for defense, solutions to problems in households and communities. I don't even understand how that is something that is possible. How do ritual killings solve problems in households and communities? Unless, of course, you start to think of the age-old stories of, say, the killing of twins and um, certain festivals that are done where they claim that they have to kill people to cleanse the land or something of that nature, which is just downright sad to think that we are still battling with things like this in this day and age. It says fame, longevity, success, wealth, political power. So all of these things can be classed into one. The the thought or the concept that ritual killings help you access wealth and power and affluence. First of all, it's entrenched in Nigerian society, so it's difficult at this point to say that's not the case or it doesn't work. Even if it doesn't work, people believe that it does, so they will continue to do it. It's a magical power, progress and development. And now, progress and development. This is what I mean when I say sometimes you see things like this and you want to laugh, because how in the world do ritual killings help progress and development? How? And I know I can trust that we have at least one viewer that will give us a perspective that we are not seeing now. And please feel free. We're not a community that judges people's opinions. We really want to see people's opinions, because one thing I've come to understand is if one person is saying it, 10 people are doing it, and 100 people are thinking it. Mr. Evans was sentenced to life imprisonment. But when he was sentenced to life imprisonment, certain questions had to come up. And before I ask these questions, I need to explain this. Billionaire Evans was a kidnapper. He kidnapped people, he asked for ransom, collected the ransom to enrich himself. But right now in Nigeria, kidnapping and banditry, as they call it, is such a rampant thing. And of course, Billionaire Evans was not the first person to be caught as a kidnapper. But certain questions have to be asked. Because if we do not ask these questions, we will be, to borrow the term of a friend of mine, in a clown show. And what do I mean by a clown show? A clown show is what happens where you are watching a clown do ridiculous things and jumping around like a mad person, while several other things are happening behind you and you cannot see them because your attention is being drawn by the clown. There are jaguars running behind, but you are looking at the clown. There are bombs falling to your side, but you're looking at the clown. This is why I feel like on this podcast, we need to ask certain questions because obviously these questions were not asked of many other people or by many other people. Why would a kidnapper kidnap people without the known financial capacity to pay a ransom? That is, for example, a boss leaves the park in Yobe and is going to Damaturu. Why would a kidnapper kidnap people in that bus and demand for 50 million naira without knowing whether or not the people in the bus have the capacity to produce 50 million naira or their relatives more so? Why would kidnappers who receive ransom amounts in millions and millions of naira remain in the most impoverished conditions in jungles and in forests and in swamps, waiting to kidnap again and do the same thing? Why does every kidnapping ring, and this is the part where the bell rings, why does every kidnapping ring have a close government official as an ally? These questions are important because if we do not ask these questions, all we will do is keep attempting to solve a problem that we do not know. There is a three-headed demon in Nigeria. There is a three-headed demon in Nigeria. And this three-headed demon is called kidnapping. What are the three heads? The first head is ritual killing. For many years in Nigeria, the idea of ritual killings, the thought of ritual killings, the representation of ritual killings in movies, in music, in popular media has been overblown and shown to the point where it is basically a cultural thing now. People understand that ritual killings happen. There is illegal organ harvesting that goes on a massive scale in Nigeria. Illegal organ harvesting for people who need organs, for foreign countries that want to do illegal testing, and there are reports upon reports and reports of this. And then there is child trafficking for the most nefarious of acts like pedophilia and rape, and for things like, again, organ trafficking and slavery and child servitude. These three things are the reasons that kidnappings have always been and continue to be a problem in Nigeria. There is no other way to explain why people have been kidnapping people in this country, and all that changes is the reason for the kidnapping. 30 years ago, they were kidnapping people for their organs. 25 years ago, they were kidnapping people for ritual killings. Right now, today, they are kidnapping people to collect ransom. If kidnapping is the problem, then we have to look forward and think that maybe the reason that people are being kidnapped is not what we think. Maybe it is not the 10 million naira that we pay that is the actual problem. Maybe it is not the 50 million naira that is the problem. Maybe the problem is that some pharmaceutical company somewhere needs livers, and the best place they can get it is from a lawless society. But let's keep our conspiracy caps somewhere else. Let's come back to the man, to the billionaire Evans. Billionaire Evans was found to be a notorious killer, a notorious man. And when you study some of the things that he was said to have done, he seemed to have done this with a very small network of people. As a matter of fact, Billionaire Evans was sentenced with two other people, but his operation was in such a manner that there is no way he would not have been dealing with a ring of several individuals who were never identified. He was, or he is, a product of what we talk about on this platform, which is Nigeria's lack of respect for the Nigerian life. We asked the question on this podcast, we said, when has the Nigerian life ever had value? This is one of the ways that you can ask that question. When has the Nigerian life ever had value? Because, think about it, Evans was sentenced to prison. What, what about the victims that he took that were never found? What about the people that were found but he has dealt serious psychological damage to? Nigeria does not follow up on these people. Nigeria does not close its case by saying that unless we make sure that we tie all loose ends concerning everybody that is tied to this individual, we shall not stop searching. We don't do that. What we do is that we go to for the spectacle, which is there is a young man here or a middle-aged man here who calls himself a billionaire kidnapper. Can you imagine this? He has this amount of money. Can you imagine this? He was able to accomplish all of this. Imagine that. And now we've put him in prison. Hooray. That is supposed to be the end of the story. I'm not buying it. I'm not even putting forth a conspiracy here, but I'm just not buying it. Because I know that the actual problem has not been dealt with, which is why Evans is not the only person. Two other individuals we are going to study on this podcast when the time comes is a man called Reverend King, who was a pastor, allegedly, and has just as gruesome acts as Evans, and Clifford Orji, who was the first celebrity Nigerian kidnapper that we had. He was said to be a cannibal. Again, another superficial reason given for kidnapping in Nigeria. Said he likes to eat human beings. How many human beings can you eat? Pardon me for sounding so direct with it, but really, how many human beings can you eat? This case, like I said, is one of the many that undermines value of the Nigerian life. Stories like this help us draw back the curtains of narrative that exists whenever people are ready to draw swords. Because, like many of the things that we discuss, we find out that by the time we look into these things, there are unanswered questions, there are unaccounted lives, and there's a stark reminder that as a people, we are really not ready to answer the important questions. How did we harbor a person like this in our society? That's an important question. How do we ensure that nobody ever goes down this path again? That's an important question. How do we make sure that anybody who was a victim of this man is not perpetually traumatized by the incident? That's an important question. Unfortunately, these are not the questions that people are asking, and it's a shame. It's a damn shame. Thank you for being with us on this episode of Fhtf, Rhtr, forgetting how to forget and remembering how to remember. Like, share, subscribe. See you next time.